So with each in-breath, opening space, arriving here. And with the out-breath, softening, letting go. And see if you can fill in the spaces in between the breath. So to every in-breath, follow with an out-breath. And to every out-breath, immediately follow in with an in-breath. Very fluid, consistent breath. Giving freedom to your belly to expand and contract. And if you will, just as an experiment, bring the corners of your lips into a soft smile. So a smile is that signal to the nervous system that it's okay to be relaxed, that it's okay to let go of that fight-flight response. And soften the space between the eyes. Sensing the space between the forehead and your brain, between your brain and your eyes. Sensing the space between your eyes and your nostrils. Sensing the space that your breath travels through from the nostrils all the way through into your lungs. Sensing that space the breath travels through. And allow yourself to palpate that depth of breath. And sensing the space between the lungs and the chest. The space in between the chest and the shoulder blades. And allow yourself to shift and move as you would like in order to feel comfortable. And so what I would love for you to do is to allow yourself to tap into your physical body, your Annamaya Kosha, as it's called in Sanskrit, the food body. So our flesh and bones and internal system, internal organs, the rate of your heartbeat. So doing a check-in with your physical body. Notice if a judgment arises. And with kindness, allowing yourself to explore the physical body and the feeling state of the physical body. This biological vessel. And see if you try to relax a part of the body that is tense. If there's an effort to relax a part of the body that is tense, notice if another part of the body tenses. And this is an experiment if you find that there's a place of tension in the body, whether it's chronic, something that you've been dealing with for a while, or if it's something new that you're noticing. See if it's possible to just breathe into that space, not attempting to change or heal it in any way, just simply be with it. So the in-breath opens space, and the out-breath allows you to soften into that space. And let the breath take you to a more energetic part of our being. So in Sanskrit, it's prana maya kosha. Prana is the vital life energy that runs through every living being. So noticing the quality of energy that you have this evening. And if you notice that there's a judgment about that, just let it go and pay close attention as if you were a scientist and you were exploring the quality without any expectation to be it another way. If you feel it's quite jumpy, nervous, excited, anxious, thrilled, more fiery, then that's what it is. Perhaps you're tapping into a more centered, cooling, equanimous energy that maybe you didn't even know that was there. Or perhaps you actually are craving, longing, yearning for more vitality because you're quite drained. So whatever the energetic quality there is, and maybe there's many, acknowledging, breathing into it. And for me, when I am tapping into the energy body, into the pranamaya kosha, it is very useful and expansive to notice that the quality of energy that I have available is interconnected to the world around me. So I often say, the air that I breathe is the same air that you are breathing. And the air that I breathe is the same air that birds flew in the morning. We felt the gentle breeze. Same air that we breathe. And that usually creates a sense of connection. And then I invite you to take a look at your mind, the mental body, this conglomerate of thoughts, feelings, ideas. a mind that it's constantly acting, performing in order to ensure that we are safe and protected, and that others that we care about are safe and protected. A mind that struggles to be at peace because it's concerned, perhaps, about what it knows it should be concerned about. So again, imagining that you are a scientist, which you are, and as if you had a thermometer and were taking the temperature of your thoughts. If there's many thoughts, then the temperature is quite high. It's heated. If you find that there's not as many thoughts, then it's a more cooling temperature, but it's a temperature nonetheless. It doesn't mean anything other than a quality of being. And more importantly, I want you to pay attention to your capacity to pay attention to your thoughts. So if you notice there are thoughts going on, and then there is a capacity to witness those thoughts. So there's a difference between an idea and that which is witnessing the idea. It's almost like a jar and the contents in the jar. So all the chatter and the mental contents are the contents in a jar. And the jar can be full of sweets or dog food or salt or pepper or any content that you wish to pour in. It can be liquid or solid. It can be savory or sweet. But what is the jar? What is your capacity to witness the contents in the mind? So this backdrop of awareness, the screen in which thoughts project, appear and disappear. Things are high and then they're low, but the screen never changes. The backdrop never changes. This awareness, the Vijnana Maya Kosha, witness consciousness. Just allow yourself to explore curiously when you can witness and when you engage in thought. The one who perceives, the one that is being perceived. And this dance of consciousness happening internally. And before we dive into contents and subjects of the mind structure, I want to close this meditation or this inquiry of the self by a before and after comparison. So just take a last moment to notice the quality of being as a whole right now, going through the physical component, the energetic component, the mental component, and without it something being better or worse, just noticing if there's a shift. And take a deep breath, in-breath through the nose. Let the chest open, the belly fill up with air. Again, a Buddha belly. And with the exhale, let it all go. Let that breath go completely, as if you were emptying out the lungs. Empty, empty, empty out completely. And on the next in-breath, make sure you can fill up your lungs to the brim, allowing the lungs to receive more breath than what they usually get. Let the chest open. And on the exhale, let it all go. If you will, you can exhale through the mouth as well. In breath through the nose. And on the exhale, let it go. And on the next in-breath, take your hands up towards the sky as if your fingertips wanted to reach and touch your ceiling. Really lengthening the spine, really trying to reach the ceiling. Let your shoulders soften. Almost like your shoulder blades wanted to kiss each other. And interlace your fingers behind your neck. And let the palms of your hands bring your chin closer towards your chest. So you're bringing a nice stretch to the back of your neck. Next in-breath, open your elbows, open your chest, let the head look up. And on the exhale, round your spine, shoulders come, elbows come towards each other, chin to chest. Next in-breath, open the chest. Bring your fingertips up towards the sky, and on the exhale, let your fingertips run through a sea of molasses. Really gentle, as if you were moving through molasses. And I will welcome you all back here on the screen. Namaste officially, and welcome to the Structuring Layers of the Self, Part 1. It's such a joy to be sharing with you these maps of meaning that have been very helpful and still are on my spiritual journey, as well as personal development, one can say. And I feel like it's a dance between the two. And to start, I think that's why I like to do this initial meditation or this experiential exploration of the layers of the self according to the Vedic philosophy and the Upanishads, which is what we did in the meditation. So my physical being, this body that has a determinate time in this planet and will go through these cycles of transformation, evolution, and then regathering back to earth. So sensing how the body is feeling, and that can open a whole new world of exploration, because it really connects us to the most tangible part of our well-being, right? How is our body doing? How is our physical body doing? And for many, it is the entry into this world of wellness and awareness and connection to self. Because the moment that we can actually listen to our bodies and breathe into it, the healthier choices we can make, because there's an actual listening and a paying attention to how we are on the most tangible level, right? So choices about food and movement, and choices about solitude or connection with other human beings. You get the picture, right? This listening to our bodies is such a gateway into our well-being. And then energetically, what is the life force that is fueling this organism, and without it having to be a particular way, right? Like I have great conversations. I have had great conversations with many of you of how this like pendulum between positivity and negativity is so strong, right? Like when we strive to be all positive and smiley and euphoric, it usually pendulums back to some sort of wanting to withdraw. So energetically, what is that equanimity that we can have access to? And the more we can pay attention to this pendulum swing, the more cultivation of life force we can have. So energetically, how we are doing and noticing how we shift and turn throughout our lifetime, but also throughout a day, right? Like a day can start really low and then eventually build up. Today was like this for me. All of a sudden there's a breakthrough because of that wanting to connect with oneself. And then the mental layer of our being, which is those energies in our energies, mental energies. And this workshop, the structuring layers of the self, really goes deep into the mental structures of our being. But most importantly and primordially is, wow, I can actually notice that this is happening. Wow, I actually have the power to focus on a particular thought or not. Wow, I can actually see that there's two logics going on and they may not even be talking to each other, right? So a part of our being is so determined that it wants to do this, and it's so looking forward to this, and it's so excited about this, while another part of our being is so sure that it's going in this direction. And when we realize there's two forces pulling through or more, and we feel split and broken. And the more that we can look inside and let all of these parts of our being talk to each other and inform each other and listen to each other's perspective, it's almost like having multiple not personality disorders, but multiple forces, right, that want to go in different directions. And the more that we can listen to all of these pulls and drives, the more integral we can be, because there's so much information that wants to come through in order for us to be whole. And there's this deep call from within our heart to want to be heard. And so the more that we can cultivate that non-judgmental awareness that can listen to every single part of our being and of our mind, and how they want to go perhaps in seemingly different directions, but maybe they want the same thing, then I believe that a lot of healing can take place. And by healing, I am using the word from its etymology. Healing comes from health, which comes from hail, which comes from wholeness. So quick etymological line, historical line of wholeness, whole, holistic, whole, integral, not leaving things out, because they all belong when they are heard, listened, and nurtured. And so that is the final layer of our being, according to, again, the Upanishads, which is the Ananda Maya Kosha, the bliss body. And in my Sanskrit studies and in my studies of Advaita Vedanta, usually bliss is this unachievable state that only saints may get to it, or when you transcend your ego is available. But there is a very interesting translation of bliss as integration. And so that's what I want to propose that we explore today. Really, it's an exploration. It's this map and this workshop that we will be going over is not well, first of all, it's not something to diagnose each other or to like prescribe something or to say that there's something, certainly not to diagnose, but it is like a living map of exploration. And if something resonates, integrate it, explore it, dive deep with it, see what makes sense, what doesn't. And if something does not make sense, explore it. And then if it definitely doesn't serve, then just let it go. Because there's this one key teaching of nutrition school, which I absolutely subscribe to, and it's this concept of bio-individuality, that we are all absolutely unique, and that the medicine that works for someone doesn't mean that it will work for somebody else. So actually somebody's medicine can turn out to be somebody else's poison. And yet nonetheless, with this map and the research that is behind it, and not like my research, but the research which inspired this map, it's quite universal. And the incentive behind that universality is for us to open our hearts with compassion to the crippling nature of our human spirit and our resilient nature of our human spirit. Does that make sense? So notice how fragile and tender and delicate our hearts are, and also how resilient and strong and powerful they can be. And so when something is triggering to me or to someone else, and I know that it may be coming from one of these structures, I can really hold it with compassion, and I can really hold it with grace, and there can be more understanding. And that doesn't mean that this situation will be less harmful or it will be right or wrong. It's not about that. It's about cultivating a compassionate heart and a compassionate perspective. And this opens a whole subject in itself, like, well, but shouldn't I set boundaries? Yeah, of course. But we're talking about just how we live with an open heart and how we meet life willing and present and willing to see what's behind things. And so that's the intro for the structuring layers of the self. Can everybody see the screen? Okay, good. When we engage in the practice of discovering space, we should develop the feeling of opening ourselves out completely to the entire universe. We should open ourselves with absolute simplicity and nakedness of mind. This is the powerful and ordinary practice of dropping the mask of self-protection. This is a quote from Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, Buddhist teacher. And there's several things of this quote that I love to unpack personally in my own life. And as I share this workshop, this is like the premise of this. This is the content of this workshop can be powerful and potent in its ordinary nature. So keep that in mind as we go. It's actually very, very simple. And in its simplicity, it's not something that we have to learn theoretically as like you'll be tested to which is the structure number 3. But how does this apply to the simplicity of your life? And how, and most importantly, I would say, how can you relate nakedly to this content? And nakedly, I mean intimately. How deep can you allow your heart to go with these contents, with these subjects? So I would qualify this workshop into the Jnana Yoga selection. So even though we won't be doing much movement, you're welcome to shift and move as you like, obviously. And if you need to get up and stretch, you can do so. We will have a break around like 8:15 and then come back. But Jnana Yoga, in the sense that even though there's not movement, the yoga that is happening is that internal cohesion, what I was talking about in the beginning of integration, union within our being. So as you may know, the word and the origin of yoga comes from that yoking, and in this case is a yoking between our being. So no piece left out, everything belongs, and I am so sorry that I pushed parts away. Let me hold everything and own it and love it so that I can actually grow. And it's a quest. It's a quest to which parts I've left out that I didn't know, which parts I consciously chose to left out, and how can these parts come back into my being to help me go back to that essence. Embodied inquiry in the sense that it really is alive if we choose to do so, if we choose to live it that way. So for many years, I focused on appearance and on memory rather than on living integration. So I could cite you a whole, maybe not a book, but a whole like conceptual map of Jacques Lacan, but I really didn't allow myself to go through the pain of doing it for myself. Does that make sense? Like, it's like a parrot, you know, like, oh, I can repeat this, but what if I actually allow myself to explore it? So that's and I did, and then my life changed, and I left the ashram. So this embodied inquiry is that open, alive exploration. So the schedule for today, we are almost at 8 o'clock, about to begin. We'll have a break around 8:15, 8:30. We'll go through some questions that will allow you to integrate this subject so that tomorrow we can meet again at 7. If you can't, this recording will be available. But if you can, we'll go through part 2 of this workshop. So let's dive in. Many of you are familiar with this Mount Meru tale, Mount Meru mythology. I really love how mythology hints us to different realities of our being, and Mount Meru in India is this amazing tale of how these forces within our being actually are one face of the same coin. So there's this situation, this story is usually called either Mount Meru, if you want to find it that way, or the churning of the ocean of consciousness. So as you see in the picture, there's this body of water, and it's being churned, it's being turned, it's being brewed. And there's one side, and then there's another. One side on the right side, you can see that there's people with crowns, and they are symbolizing this like nobility. And on the other side, you see people with horns, or like creatures with horns. And this is meant to represent like the devas, the divinity, the nobility, and the asuras. With the asuras are like the demonic, or those like darker forces of our being. And this story, this myth, takes place at a time in which they need the nectar of immortality to spread. The nectar of immortality can represent wisdom, can represent enlightenment, can represent that spirit that brings things alive. You know, so in a time where things are bare and dry, this nectar can bring things to life. And so the Amrita, the nectar of immortality. And so everybody's dying, really. And so the devas and the asuras need to come together, and they tie in the snake. This is absolutely, Indian mythology is full of sexual themes, but I think it's because sexuality at that time was not necessarily so perverse. And so it represented this union between the masculine and the feminine, and it represented this union between polarities, right? So it wasn't like this grotesque sex, it was just representing qualities of our being of union, right? So they tie, and I say this because they tie the snake around this like phallic thing and they start pulling it, and the phallic thing mountain releases this nectar of immortality, which is life energy, right? So it's this like, yeah, okay, you get the picture. So this like flowering, blossoming of life coming into being. And the metaphor goes on. But the reason why I want to open with this myth is because it is that work of bringing the polarities of our being into work and realizing that no, there is no like witch and angelic part. It's all really working for the same purpose. So the premise to begin with, and if you have your journal available, I would love for you to take a moment to write, what does freedom mean to you? And if you took this workshop about a month ago, I invite you to reassess, what does freedom mean to you? Especially at a time in which a lot of liberties are taken away, we can really look within and explore what does freedom actually mean? And so the pretense of this body of work, of my training, and of psychoanalysis in general, is that freedom is when we are able to take a look at all of these forces that are running the show. So basically, you are not free until you see all of the different forces that are moving you. So the question is, are we free when being driven by unconscious motives and unknown forces within us? And so the premise and the answer to this question is, if I can see the totality of my being, if I am able to see how one force is pulling to one side and the other to another, they're actually working for the same purpose. It's not anything like evil or wrong. It's just, they seem to be separate, but they're actually one. And therefore I can have access to unlimited potential. And that unlimited potential would be, metaphorically, the Amrita, the nectar of immortality. And that is the freedom that all of the parts of my being are working towards, that access to my potential. And psychoanalysis usually talks about two spheres of the mind, the unconscious layer and the conscious layer, the subconscious, what can't be known, and the conscious, what you are allowed to know. But in my studies at the ashram, we also talked about the supraconscious. So just to differentiate like unconscious of the mind and supraconscious of those more like archetypical or divine forces of nature that we have access to. So you may be familiar with this point that Carl Jung made, that if we want to reach to the heavens, we need to be rooted down onto earth. And those two forces can integrate within the conscious mind. Jack Kornfield is a Buddhist teacher that I take a keen on studying with, and he was a Buddhist monk for many, many years, American Buddhist teacher, and he speaks about freedom. Free is not free from feelings, but free to feel each one and let it move on, unafraid of the movement of life. And so again, this deep listening to what is going on internally without a need to change it or manipulate it or control it. Yes, we can direct life energy as we will and access that potential. But as long as we're running away from something, it's going to be actually very difficult to do so. So that embrace, that holding of the entirety of our being. And the really interesting thing is, in its simplicity, is that the mind always follows this cycle of emergent conditions. Emergent conditions, conditions that emerge over and over, cyclical nature of emergent conditions. So you can keep this in mind whenever you find that there's a pleasurable sensation or a pleasant feeling coming in. You may notice that there's a tendency to want to hold on into that because it's so pleasurable and nice and comforting and we love pleasure. And that would be all really, really lovely, except that when the cycle keeps turning and life is, by nature always changing, then there is the other phase of pleasure, which is pain. And when pain comes along, it's actually quite discomforting and it's difficult to feel. And so we want to avoid those unpleasant sensations and hold on to the pleasure. And what Buddhism says is that when we do that, when we reject pain and want to hold on to pleasure, then there's this chain reaction that causes entanglement and suffering. And that's the nature of our being, right? There's nothing wrong with doing that. It's just what the mind does. And that's why Buddhism, the first principle is life is suffering because we do this. And so they talk, and this is one of my dearest teachings. They talk about the 8 worldly dharmas. So 8 worldly principles. Dharmas as in like laws, basically. And it talks about the duality of this life. And so there will be times when there is pleasure and there's times when there is pain. And the fact that we can have access to one means that another time there will be the other, and sometimes they happen simultaneously. And so the same with gain. There's moments when there's tremendous gain and abundance and gain, and then we lose that, only to gain again and only to lose again. And the same with fame. There's moments in which we are up in the pinnacle of fame, whether it be something amazing we did, or there's a moment of fame, and then there's a fear of disgrace, of falling from that place. It can be in any arena of life. It can be in our most intimate circles, or if we are relating to a social context. And the same with praise and blame. So there's times where, like for me, when there's praise, I always hesitate because I feel like on another moment, blame is going to come in. Especially as we are learning and evolving beings, and myself that I'm starting to teach more and being so young and experienced in some ways, but unexperienced in others. I'm always like, okay, I'm going to share the best that I can, humbly and open to feedback and to growth, because I never know what other framework is going to come in, right? So just holding that there's these opposites. And I say like this because it's actually one force in life allows for a tenderness in the heart. Rumi, who is a Sufi poet, has this, it's a very famous poem called The Guest House. It's translated by Coleman Barks. He's actually very ill now, I found out. At the ashram, we would watch these documentaries, and I always thought that they were like relatively new. And the other day I saw a recent documentary of Coleman Barks, and he was actually quite old, and I was taken by surprise, because in my mind he was super young, but it's because it was an old documentary. Anyway, Coleman Barks, may he be well, he translates these beautiful poems by Rumi. And the guest house goes like this. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. So this unexpected word is key, because usually that's what happens with the 8 worldly dharmas. There's an unexpected visitor. We're happy-go-lucky with pleasure, and then there's a moment of intense pain that wasn't expected, right? The same with all. So comes in it as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide beyond. And so this idea of holding our life experience and the ups and the downs, in Sanskrit, it's called vrittis. You know, like, I love it, I hate it, this is super nice, I don't like this. And it constantly goes up and down. And the more that we can see it, contain it, so in the meditation I spoke about a jar and its contents, the more we can take that position of the jar and hold the experience, the more we can learn actually from life. And so talking about the jar is what Vedic philosophy and Advaita Vedanta and actually Christianity and any religion that teaches about love and unity is talking about the jar, is talking about that real self that holds our experience. And for Advaita, this real self is the Gyoti Bindu. Gyoti Bindu is translated as a point of light in the mind of God, or the Atman. And so Advaita is always is always directing the person who is inquiring, or the person who is interested, is always directing you to the source, is always directing you to who is experiencing this, who is thinking this, to whom does this appear, who are you really? So I often in these workshops put myself the first on the surgery table. Like after I've been cracked open and have seen how great it is, it's easy for me to do, and then people may be able to relate. And so these identities and these games that we play, that is absolutely crucial to play it right and to keep consistency, right? So for a mom to say, oh, I'm actually not a mom, I am pure spirit. There's like a what's the word, like a split mind there. There's an incongruency in the narrative of the game that we are playing. But let me see if I can give another example. Like, oh, I am Prema, I am a meditation teacher, and I am a yoga instructor. Yeah, but what else? Like, is there something else to Prema? Well, of course there is. There's all of these different facets of the diamond, of the being of God. And so these identities that we form are crucial in order to play the game. And we'll get into that later in the workshop as these archetypal forces. But don't get caught up on the identity. Keep exploring who you are to the source of its being. Go back to the essence. And the essence, according to Advaita, is the one God who shines within everything, who is formless like the cloudless sky, is the pure stainless self of all. without any doubt, that is who I am. I want to speak so much about this, but I have a feeling that if I go over the structuring layers, it will answer itself. So we have a tendency as human beings to want to hold on to an identity because it's consistent and because it forms a persona to which we can play to. The moment that we get caught up in one of these identities, the more difficult it is to open to other learnings in life. So I am not saying quit it all, move to an ashram and forget your identities. What I am saying is allow yourself to explore who is it that is performing these things. Because the ego will always want to be in a state of homeostasis. Homeostasis, this like balanced state of being. But this balance is set by its own criteria. We'll go over that in a moment. And when we allow ourselves to explore beyond that homeostasis, growth happens. So this idea of death and rebirth, of transformation, of the phoenix rising from the ashes, that's the invitation for us to do daily, right? Of rediscover what is happening internally and what wants to emerge. And the moment that we say, oh no, I actually don't want to emerge, I feel really comfortable in this, I don't want to let go of this, we are resisting a next chapter in life. And that is what psychoanalysis says. It's self-sabotage. It's not this evil thing, it's just resistance to grow into what wants to emerge or giving the best of who you are. So Frank Ostaseki is a grief counselor. He's also a Buddhist teacher, and he, to me, is one of the most eloquent people in integration. Favorite quote ever: to be whole, back to this integral, whole, complete. To be whole, we need to include, accept, and connect all parts of ourselves. We need acceptance of our conflicting qualities and the seeming incongruity of our inner and outer worlds. Wholeness does not mean perfection. It means no part left out. So this capacity to almost like re-mother, re-hold our being in all of its facets. I spoke about the ego earlier, and the ego in the context of this workshop, I want to refer to as this universal mind structure, psychological term that refers to the mind. And it is this like tool that allows us to relate with and in the world. And the structure of the ego is very universally, structurally is the same. But that's the premise of psychoanalysis, that we all have the same mind structure, but the degrees and the nuances within each layer, and we'll get to the layers quite soon, will depend a lot based on context, epoch, and obviously culture. So the ego begins to form, let me see, to make sure this is the right side. So when I talk about the source of being and this source of existence, the source of life, that it doesn't matter how we call it, and I've told several of you that my favorite term for God is mysterium tremendum ad fascinum. This word comes from Latin, and it means this awe, fascinating, and inspiring mystery. So it doesn't matter how we call this source of life, the source of inspiration, where all artists say that they get their ideas truly any source of inspiration, this like spark of life, this breath of life, however we call it, is this mystery. And the gift of every religion is that we come from that. We are a piece of that. That's our home. That's our source. And so I've never had a past life regression. I'm not interested in that, but I've read some tales. And I've also never have had a near-death experience, but I've read some tales. Anita Murjani is a wonderful source of that. And I want to keep this very relatable, not woo-woo, not tan woo-woo. It's a new podcast, go check it out. Not tan woo-woo with No Pasa Nada. But what the point that I want to make is that where we come from is a mystery. It doesn't matter how we call it. And there's different theories, and you can go as woo as you want as to where we come from. People say that they've been there. People say that they've been there and returned. I haven't, but what I do know is that it is this awe-inspiring mystery to me, because all I can feel when I meditate and open my heart is this openness and expansion and true love. Why love? Because it is open, forgiving, it's pure goodness, and it's pure love. And we all have different experiences of it. Open space, expansive. And so the premise is that we come from this as a point of light in the mind of God. We come from this into this world through two people having sex and creating a baby, and we come. And that whole process, we can get into epigenetics and everything else, but for the purposes of this conversation, I want you to think expansion and then coming into this world. I want you to think awe-inspiring mystery, Satchit Ananda, Christ consciousness, Buddha nature, goodness, love, limitless, boundless awareness, and coming to this world. So that to talk about the structure of the ego. So we come to this world from this open space, and there's all of these stimuli in the world, and the ego is what we form in order to relate to the world, because we are no longer in this expanded, open, good space. There's a world with stimuli, there's people with ulterior motives. We can sense all of this. We need to form a way to relate to the world without cracking open, basically. So that's the ego. And through, and we'll get into that more later, but to move forth through this process, we forget that we come from this awe-inspiring, fascinating mystery. So coming into the world from this space and coming into form, and people saying, oh, there's little Timmy, and little Timmy begins to identify with little Timmy, and there's this mirror stage moment where mommy shows little Timmy his picture or his face in the mirror, and he says, oh, this is me. And now little Timmy is this boy that's going through this process, and it adapts into being little Timmy, and it forgets that it comes from pure consciousness. And so in doing it chooses to do, or we choose to do that so that we can adapt in this world. And the way that we adapt is through the formation of what Melanie Klein, a child psychoanalyst, she was the first psychoanalyst woman after Anna Freud's daughter, and her work is fascinating because she is the first woman who explored psychoanalytic drives in children and the unconscious in children. And if you take a look at her work, it appears to be very strange, but in essence, what she talks about is this drive for love, that the child, love and goodness that the child has, and how it chooses to adapt in order to satisfy its caretakers. And so it forms, or we form, this selective semi-permeable membrane. So if you remember in biology, the cell has a semi-permeable membrane that chooses which proteins and lipids it can take in and which it doesn't want to take in. Do you all remember that cell membrane structure that chooses and then rejects? We do the same with our impulses, with our stimuli, according to Melanie Klein. So there's some stimuli that are legitimately happening, but they may feel too overwhelming, and so we choose not to get those in. But then there's other stimuli that we want to take in, and we go through this semi-permeability in our child development. Another quote from Song of the Abadut. "O mind, why are you so deluded? Why do you run about like a frightened ghost? Become aware of the indivisible self. Be rid of attachment. Be happy and free." I spoke about the persona. I think this is coming up, but Jung talks about these 4 functions of the psyche. So 4 ways that we relate to, through, and with the world. So first function is feeling, developing that inner felt sense, and then how does the world feel? How do stimuli feel? Thinking, so actually conceptually grappling with ideas, thinking things through. Sensation, inner felt sense, and intuition, which is fascinating, that capacity to see the nuances of a situation. And all of these 4 functions are super active in our childhood as we begin to take the stimuli from the world. These slides, I apologize for the jumping back and forth into themes. So back into lack and forgetfulness. When we forget where we come from, we forget. And what that creates is a hole in our being, or a sense of a hole, because actually there is none. And this is Jacques Lacan's work in understanding that sense of being empty, that sense of lack that every human being has. Sense of lack. Imagine like a puzzle that is our being, and we've taken out this piece, which is pure consciousness, which is that mysterium tremendum ad fascinam, because nobody in our circle understood or communicated that to us, or didn't know how. And so we try to put into that puzzle any piece that would cover up for that hole. And the pieces are endless, you know. You can put in like dresses or boyfriends or friendships or alcohol or drugs or anything that will numb down that sense of lack. And really the one piece that will fit is the one piece that is the goodness and the love of our wholeness. But we go through life forgetting that that's what is actually missing. And so this lack that Lacan talks about pervades our entire existence, until we are able to moment by moment recognize, like, okay, no, I am infinite, internal, and whole, and I can go through this task without feeling like there's something missing. And when there's something missing, I can approach it in a different way, not thinking that this relationship will actually satisfy the lack that I feel, or that this chocolate will satisfy. It will give pleasure, right? And it's not about not getting into friendships or not getting into food or not, no, it's about really understanding where we come from when we deal with these impulses in life. Otherwise, everything that we are doing is an attempt to fill that void. And again, the only thing that will actually suffice is our own being. So this barrier that we create, the stimulus barrier, we'll call the censor, because it is like a censoring agency inside of us that chooses what is okay to come in and what is actually better if it doesn't come in, what is accepted, what is better if it's not if it doesn't come in. And so as pure consciousness coming from this open space of goodness, we are extremely sensitive. It's like all of our antennas are open, and there are things that feel overwhelming to us. And so in order to cope with all of these stimuli, we develop this stimulus barrier, which is actually so tenderizing. It creates such tenderness in my heart, because usually psychoanalysis it's looked at as something really dark, of like looking at these evil impulses within our being. And the more that I read about it and study, especially in authors like the ones that I've mentioned, it's just based on pure love. Like the creation of this membrane that Melanie Klein is talking about is really just a desire to protect yourself from what seems overwhelming. So, you know, like if your aunt is talking too high pitch and that seems overwhelming, you'll try to protect yourself because you want to be safe. If a glass breaks and that feels overwhelming, you'll try to protect yourself because it feels safer. And these attempts to protect yourself and to guard yourself are based just on the pure desire to be safe inside. The problem is that as we grow older, these defenses don't necessarily grow with us. So there is this, by creating this stimulus barrier, we are dividing our mind between what we know and what we don't know. And what we don't know feels like it is overwhelming, because it was overwhelming when we were very little. But as we grow older, it is no longer as overwhelming. So as we are growing into our adult years, we could potentially deal with things that we couldn't deal with when we were children. But because we developed that protection and those defensive mechanisms and that stimulus barrier and that censoring agency that feels like, oh, little Andrea is too afraid to deal with it, we have to repress this so that she's safe. This censoring agency will be present as I grow older, unless I actually open it up and discover what is there and embrace it with love. And it usually feels overwhelming, but it's not. To the adult that is processing, it is an act of love to the inner child to do that, and doing it with patience and utmost love. So a little bit of history of psychoanalysis. I will give us a break. I got a little bit confused on the slides. I'll give us let's take a 7-minute break and come back at 8:27. Is that okay? 8:27? Perfect. Thank you. So take time to stretch, take a glass of water, go to the restroom, do whatever you have to do, and I'll see you in 7 minutes. Do you want to use the restroom? shall continue. So I wanted to see if I can give more context to this whole idea of the stimulus barrier and why are we spending so much time talking about it, and why is it even important for us to go over it, and contextualizing on the history of psychoanalysis, not as a theoretical framework, but just to understand the origins of this method, because it is the nectar of talk therapy. And why is it so wonderful? You can see psychoanalytic threads, let's say, in most world religions. So by psychoanalytic, I don't mean that it has anything to do with Freud. I mean by psychoanalytic. I mean by that psychic, and not psychic as in like voodoo, not voodoo, but like psychic, but of the psychic, of the psyche, a view into the psyche. So world traditions always had an interest in a psychic well-being, in the well-being of mental health, basically, and of bringing cohesiveness and integrity into the life of an individual. So the origins of counseling you can see in like churches, when churches held their principles real. So people would go to confession, for instance, and they would receive either advice or peace through talking through things. So psychoanalysis as a method develops in the 1900s in Vienna, Austria, which you can think back as a time where individuals were super like westernized. So things where ethics were one thing, and people were into capitalism and the industrialization. Societal structures and norms had already been like grounded, and individuals were very uptight and upright, and all of these more primal tendencies had been repressed. By repressed, just not acceptable. And so this is where the concept of the unconscious begins to be explored, because people, and primarily women, were given the chance to talk, but later men as well. People were finding disconnects between their lives. Symptoms were appearing, and they seemed to not have a relatable cost to it. So a woman couldn't move her arm, but there wasn't any like physical injury relating to that, or sexual dysfunction, or social incapacity to relate in social context, and irrational fears, and all of these things were happening. And so what basically happened is that this man, Sigmund Freud, who had been a psychiatrist dealing with the chemical balances and imbalances in the brain, decided to actually just listen to what patients had to say. And there's a lot of history and politics within psychoanalysis. I'm talking about just the gift of talk therapy, because what happened is that as he began to listen to his patients, symptoms were coming up and disappearing. So basically through having a space where people could talk and be listened to from a non-judgmental, educated presence, symptoms were shape-shifting and being released. So this is where free association gets established as a method. So people would come in and say whatever would come to their mind, and they would relate things to other things that seemed unrelated, and there was a release, there was a letting go of something, there was space for new creative thought, basically. So Freud talked about symptoms or disease as this code that could be decoded for more freedom to come in. Now, again, there's so many like politics within psychoanalysis. What I want this workshop to focus on is on this mystery of when something is brought up to the light, when something that was unseen is being brought up to the light of our own awareness, and we can contain it and work with it and transmute it, this transformation that happens. And what was before something that was stagnant and that held us down, once we can actually hold it with love and tenderness and embrace it and integrate it, we can actually open up to this new reality of our being and be more whole and radiant. But this concept of the unconscious, where all of these repressive memories are, is what Freud focused on. And he's said that these traumatic memories from childhood are frozen in time and they are stored in the unconscious. What he meant by frozen in time is that something that was overwhelming to me when I was 3 will continue to feel overwhelming to me when I am 25 or 40 or 50 or 60, until I can actually melt that frozenness and meet it with the tenderness of love. So these repressive memories, when they are unexplored, they create a pattern in our being that structure our lives. And we defend against the world. It's interesting because when psychoanalysis was developed again in Vienna, I was talking about these like primal instincts were the ones that were being repressed. But now it seems like things have flipped and all of these primal instincts are up in the air. And what is repressed is our goodness and our tenderness and our and the sweetness of being human and being able to relate with other people. There's this wonderful book, if you're interested in this, from Eric Fromm, Zen Buddhism and Psychoanalysis, of these codes that need to be decoded within our being. So we all, how would this be? To give examples, like we all have these dreams, goals, desires to grow into something. And it can be like, I want to give up smoking, or I want to stop having sex with random people, or I want to finish my degree in this career, or I want to write a book, or I want to exercise more consistently, or I want to get up earlier. And all of these like, yes, let's grow drives, right? And there's this determination for this to happen. And then all of a sudden we're drinking again, or we realize that we're hungover, or we wake up next to somebody that we actually really didn't want to sleep with, or there's this like glitches in the system within. And these codes, it would be useful to understand why that glitch happens. And that's what psychoanalysis wants us to decode, right? That these inconsistencies, these patterns are there for self-observation, and that once we understand why that thing happens, more freedom can come in. And there's this magic of decoding the codes, because there's actually very important information there for our development. So interpretation gives meaning. So something that to the mind, like, wow, this woman with the yellow dress makes me feel uncomfortable for some reason. I just don't like her. Things like this that happens in daily life, when we can give interpretation to them. And ideally, and I'm 100% subscribed to therapy, So with a professional that can help you decode those interpretations and give you compassion, we move from this feeling of being a victim to life circumstances to much more self-empowerment and self-responsibility, and having more freedom to go through these goals that we have. So basically shifting from an autopilot to sovereignty and understanding that we are creating this life that we have, co-creating this life that we have, because we're co-creating with others as well. So it's interesting because here I am talking about how important it is to interpret things, but really what I am talking about is giving meaning to things so that it makes sense to us and that we continue to grow. There is this amazing tale from Buddhism about a farmer. You maybe have heard this story. This farmer who has a working horse, whom back in the day was gold to have a working horse. And one day this horse goes off into the fields and it has an accident. And so all of the neighbors come by and they're like, oh my God, I am so sorry that this happened. What a shame. This is so bad. You don't have a working horse. And the farmer, who is very equanimous, says, maybe it's bad luck. It's maybe bad luck. Maybe it's not. They find a new horse, and the son of the farmer rides it, and they go into the fields, and this horse has an accident, falls down on the son's leg. And while this happened, all of the neighbors are like, oh, we're so happy that you got a horse. That's wonderful. You have such good luck that this happened. And the farmer is like, well, maybe, perhaps it's good, perhaps it's bad, who knows. When the son comes with the injured leg of the horse, everybody's like, oh, this is so sad. We're so sorry that this happened. What a shame. And the farmer again is like, well, who knows, maybe. It's this like equanimous presence really with what happens. And the next day, the army comes to draft men to go to war. And the son can't go to war because he has a broken leg. And so the neighbors say, oh, that's wonderful luck. And the farmer says, who knows? So there is this like ambiguous thing with interpretation, that it's not that something is wonderful or not wonderful. It's the meaning that we associate to things and how we relate to them. And finally, we can go into the layers of the self. I promise we'll be done by 9. And then that's why I love that we have a session tomorrow, because then we can discuss all of these things. This workshop gets bigger and bigger. Maybe I'll have to do like 4 sessions. So these layers of the self, we basically talked about them already, but I want to to have them clear. So this painting by Hilma Klint, I want you to imagine the structure and layers of the self as these layers, really like an onion. And when we are talking about the mind, not about the brain, but about these synapses and like the mind, like Wi-Fi or like internet, the mind as intelligence, it's difficult to place one layer somewhere, but it's helpful to see it as these structures. So I love this portrait because there's this silver lining that connects from the outermost layer to the innermost layer. And these layers structure our being and our perception of reality. And the first layer is the sensor, which we spoke about in the beginning as the semi-permeable membrane, or this agency within our being that decides what is okay to know and what is too frightening to know. the thing is that this censoring agency is part of our being. And so it knows. And so it is determining something for us as if it were separate, but it's actually a part of our being. And so whatever was overwhelming was actually known, but we tried to protect ourselves from it. And this censor, literally, because it says like, oh no, this may be too overwhelming. It's better if we don't know the full story of this, to maintain the sense of homeostasis within our being. But the thing with the censor is that as we grow older, it will keep our conscious mind slave to the unconscious mind until we allow, like this, open the gates for all the information to come in. And the censor keeps us small, because what was overwhelming for me when I was 3, again, when I'm older, I can deal with it, and I have tools and I have opportunities to process this. But for the censor, it's still too overwhelming. So it's the first layer, because it's the most difficult to open through. When the censor is active in order to protect us, it's really not just protecting us from overwhelming things. It's also like creating a barrier between information, creating a barrier between connection, creating a barrier between love, care, tenderness. And it is inhibiting us from growing. So we are inhibiting. We are our greatest inhibitors. And the more that we can connect to that vulnerable part that we are actually protecting, magical things happen, because we've opened the gate to more information and can trust in our inherent power. Second layer that structure our being is the intrauterine subconscious. And this layer is pre-verbal. What that means is that it is before language. We're talking about mental structures and energetic structures. And the intrauterine subconscious is a very nuanced one, because it takes place when we are in the womb of our mother, and we all come from mothers. We all have been in a womb and this mysterious life-forming experience. And as Lacan said, mother and child are one. When we are in the womb of our mother, a lot of transmissions happen. A lot of information of what the mother is experiencing gets translated to the embryo. And it is not based on based on language, because consciously there is love and care and expect, like a joy for the child to be born in the best case scenarios. But there is also hesitation, there is fear, there is nervousness there about herself, right? And that gets transmitted to the child in utero. And all of what the mother hasn't processed gets translated into the child. And so these fantasies, these structures that the mother is having remain in our awareness. Nonetheless, the womb will always be the safest space that we know. Because it is a space where we effortlessly could grow. Everything was being given in the womb. So there was food available, there was shelter available. And so, and here it's a loophole into another workshop on self-sabotage, but like when we drink ourselves to numbness, when drugs totally numb awareness, there's this like unconscious desire to get back into the womb and be passive and inactive and recreate a sense of being back in the womb. The field of epigenetics is really interesting in the intrauterine subconscious. I won't get into it today, but we may get into it tomorrow, of like what were the energies that were playing out at that time, from like what the mother was feeding herself to like the relationship that she had with her partner and how she dealt with that when we were coming into life, her desires of what we were going to be and what she was going to be in relation to us, and how that was possible or not possible, and all of those energies that were taking place in our formation are pre-verbally here with us. And that leads to the personal subconscious. So personal, when we are born and we have all this feedback from the world and our primary caretakers. So primary caretakers can be our biological mother, or can be a grandmother or an aunt, or any female caretaker and a male caretaker. That can be a father, or can be a grandfather or an uncle or a stepdad, or whatever male and female caretakers we have available, because they are forming us into being. And there is this play between freedom and emergence of the child into its own qualities and its own talents, and these like unconscious desires for us to become something. And this can be very, very stereotypical. But it's super nuanced at the same time. I speak about this wonderful discovery of quantum physics of interference patterns, which is basically like male figure has an idea or an expectation of what we can become or how we should be. And then female or two forces has an idea of what we can become and what we can be. And these two ideas intermingle, they interfere, and we receive that as a conscious being. Like, and from there on, we can make a choice. We can say like, okay, mommy, I will do this. Or we can say, no, I reject this. I will never do this. So we can say yes or no, but nonetheless, we are relating to that command. So Timmy, you're going to be a lawyer just like your dad, or and you can say, yes, of course, I will do this on call. Or you can say, no, I will never do this. You're such a sweet girl. And I can, yes, be a super sweet girl. Or I can say, no, I won't be. I'm going to be emo, or I'm going to be a punk and I'm going to rebel. But it's always in relation to this command of the parents. And until later in adulthood, we can actually say, you know, I actually, I won't relate to this. I will carve my own path. Or we can say, usually we say yes or no and continue to be in relation to that and rebel against it, or say yes to that. We'll get more into the archetypal pattern and how we can carve our own path. But this personal subconscious is totally circumstantial, and it's super personal. If you have siblings, you may know that it may be evident that you're entirely different beings, obviously, because you're unique. But even like the way that parents related to us. So my brother Diego and I, we grew up in the same household, but it wasn't really the same household because my mom, it was her second pregnancy with Diego. It was her first pregnancy with me. My dad was present when I grew up. My dad wasn't present when Diego grew up. So we have a very different perspective of the world and our care system. And so we grew up to be entirely different people, and focused on different things and with different traumas based on our circumstances when we were growing up. And even though we weren't measured like by cup the same amount of milk, but like we went to the same school, we got the same privileges, etc., the feelings of superiority and inferiority are different in my case than in his case. And that's that's really interesting, of how we receive a projection and we interiorize it of what the what we could be for the other, and whether we say yes or no to that. So basically, the personal subconscious goes from our primary nuclear systems, or nuclear family system, and it expands to an extended family system. So if an aunt would say to me like, oh, you're so smart, and that props me up, I'll really be studious and get a better grade. Or, oh, you talk so much, maybe I won't talk that much. Or, oh, you're so pretty, maybe I like that, maybe I don't like that. But we begin to relate to the desires and projections of the other upon ourselves, and that usually can have a very strong imprint. Same as like the kindergarten and the school system. Like, I cannot tell you how many of my friends in school, particularly males, were totally castrated by a school system that didn't support their own affinities and their own talents, because it was based on a particular logic of what intelligence was, right? When there are all of these different intelligences. And so that set up a path for them in their life. And of course, the social system will determine our personal subconscious. And the social system is quite linked to the collective subconscious. So the collective subconscious are, as we grow older and we begin to see beyond our family system, it's like, okay, this is what happens in my family. And then I begin to see what my friends are doing in their own house, and that influences me. And then I see, perhaps I turn on the television and there's a TV show, and I see that there's a different way of doing things. And then maybe my dad is reading the newspaper and I take a look at that and it informs me of something. And this collective subconscious, it will always be based on cultural class and epoch. So it totally awakens me. I'm not finding a better word to describe this. It awakens me when I see that I am living this life in Costa Rica, working my work hours relating to my friends, and then somebody will tell me something that is going on the other side of the world, where somebody does not have the same opportunity that I have. And so it's like, it wakes me up to this larger field of reality. So the collective subconscious will be very different based on culture, class, and epoch. And the media will have dominance of which ideals we're looking into, or master signifiers we have available. Master signifiers is basically a word that means, what should we all be thinking about? So money is a master signifier. Right now, COVID and the vaccine is a master signifier. It's like what everybody can relate to and talk about. So a very strong collective message is what success is, and what a successful adult or a successful accomplishment would look like for you. So in our capitalistic culture, money is the master signifier, and this is not against money at all. It's like how we relate to our own success. And this leads into the archetypal subconscious. So the archetypal subconscious is what is in the field of Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell's work, and their development on how mythology relates to our psychology. So these primordial stories that come from consciousness that want to be lived through you. So archetypes as these ideas in the mind of God, or this creative force that wants to come through every human being and live a unique story. Archetypes are these heroic patterns of how we go through challenge and resilience in our own life. And so when we encounter an archetypical moment is when we can become the heroes of our own life, not the victims of our own life. And even being a victim is an archetype. So this is a very subtle layer, and I've spoken about before how can an archetype be distorted. So this is a spectrum. So how an archetype can be distorted is, I can say, well, my archetype is that of a muse, so I inspire people, and then I just post my naked pictures on Instagram, and I am a muse and I inspire men to write poetry. Or another distortion can be like, we are born, let's say, and I use this example in our class at Nexus, like you are born with the archetype of a healer. So there's an imprint in your being that you want to help others heal and be integrated. And you are born in 1994. And so as you grow older, what is common is that you would go to med school and graduate from medicine school, which is fantastic because then you know all of these structures of the anatomy and etc. But it gets distorted because usually what happens is that the pharmaceutical industry tells you what is good and what is not, and you end up behind a desk prescribing medicines to people. I am not against pharmaceuticals. I'm not against medicine. I am talking medicines. Obviously, I'm not against medicine. I'm not against pills. What I'm saying is that what was the healing? And so this archetypal imprint gets distorted. And it's the same with music. It's the same with architecture. It's the same with these talents that we can bring into the world and birth us a new culture, a new society, and yet the system is so strong that it may get distorted. And so I would say one of my goals in this workshop is to inspire you to uproot yourself and rise with those structures that you have, with those archetypes that you feel in resonance with. So a way that you can find this archetypical pattern is to see where you feel most afraid. Like for me, it's talking in public. And like I was watching this podcast, that the episode that we launched, and I was like, oh, I was actually maybe a little bit more eloquent than I thought that I would be. And this like facing fear and going beyond where fear is. Trusting in that force. There's a wonderful movie that I would invite you all to watch. It's called Finding Joe. I'll send you the link. It's on YouTube. But this awakening of courage within, and an archetype is usually always in service to others. So a hero is not a hero because it's in a pedestal shining. A hero is a hero because it learns a lesson and it brings it back for others to learn from and with. So this archetypical path is a call for adventure. I am surprised by how quickly the session has gone. It's almost 9, and I think that there's like 20 more slides to go. And I want to be very, very respectful of your time, but I don't want to leave us floating in the air with this amount of information. So let me talk about the final structure, final 2 structures, and then I'll find a way to wrap it up by 9:02 so that you can take homework to do, and then we meet tomorrow and piece it all together, okay? So 6th structure is Sanskaras, and Sanskaras is a Sanskrit word that basically stands for the tendencies that we bring from past experiences and even lifetimes. So a Sanskara could be, for me, as a child, I was always very drawn to ragas, to Indian music. And I had no prior experience of them or my family, or no sort of connection. But every time I would hear a raga or the smell of incense, something would spurt up in my being. When I first started to delve into psychology, I felt so alive, and I felt like I knew this in some sort of way, whether it be from how traumatized I was, or because I actually had lived through some of that in theory. Sanskaras can be when you feel like this undescribable desire to do something and you don't know where it comes from, but you resonate with it. So the invitation is to learn to sublimate those sanskaras. And this is a very subtle layer, because it goes into that mystery of, why did you become a graphic designer? Like, what was that desire to create, to imitate, to communicate, to this drive to do something? And this leads us to the 7th layer, the Atman, which is our real self, and which is always pervading our structures and our being. And I'll finalize, I think, yeah, this is appropriate. I'll finalize with this story of the king. But before I say that, before I say the story, the Atman as a structure or as a layer, because it doesn't matter what has happened, it doesn't matter how distorted our structures seem to be or how traumatized we feel that we are, the real self is always accessible and ready to be accessed. It's almost like this like Jehovah's Witness idea of like God's hand is always ready for you to take, you know, like this grace is always palpable. And we can access this through our meditations, through prayer, through journaling, just remembering that essence of who we are. And the remembrance is the key here. And I'll finalize with the story of the king who was getting this, he was getting older, and his mind wasn't functioning as well, and he could foresee that in the coming years he wouldn't be as suitable to continue running his kingdom. He had no heir to his throne, so he was a widow, and there was no child to continue with the dynasty. And so as a very centered and noble king, he decides to make this a very democratic process. So he he sends an invitation to everybody in the kingdom and says, you know, the position is open. Anybody who is interested or has ever had a desire to become a king is welcome to come to a meeting, to a hearing. Everybody will get the same chance of applying for the job, and just show up Thursday at 7 p.m. And so the day comes and people from all over the kingdom show up to the palace. And because the king really wants this to be a very fair and equal and democratic process, he, you say democratic or that democratic, right? Now I say Democrat and it feels like I'm talking about Republicans and Democrats, but like a fair process, right? And so he wants everybody to feel like they are welcomed and nobody is better or less than. So he gives everybody an entry into the castle, and everybody can wear the clothes that they want. And they are, of course, fed with this delicious banquet, and they're giving things to drink. And they're all like courting each other and saying how beautiful the jewels look on these people. And then they start criticizing and judging how other people look. And it becomes this whole social event. And these people are having fun. And so the king is just patient, waiting for people to come back into the meeting and do the whole shebang kingdom ruling event. And then all of a sudden time passes, and all of a sudden it gets really quiet. So the king thinks it's time to welcome everybody and start having people interview for the job. And so he sends his minister down to the banquet place to bring people, to summon them back to the chamber. And so the minister goes off, and he comes back a few minutes later, and he is very sad and disappointed, and he tells the king that everybody's gone, nobody's left, and that people were all fed with these amazing meals. People were no longer hungry, they were tired, and they were ready to go home. And so they had forgotten why they were there in the first place. And this tale is very symbolic and useful in the sense that may we remember why we are here, and not here particularly in this workshop, but why we are here in this world, in this particular circumstance that we are being faced with. And may we remember the purpose of why we first showed up into this palace world in the first place. And even though we go through these experiences of being dressed and fed and sometimes starved and sometimes not having things to wear, and then we go up and wear these beautiful dresses and then we don't, and like, I'm talking for myself, like, why am I here in the first place? And this I think is the note that I would like to end on, so that I give you all time to rest. I will send the slides that didn't get shown, and I will send, primarily what I am interested is that you go over, it won't take much time, but you go over, we'll go through this tomorrow, but that you go over these final questions. And you are welcome to journal to whichever question resonates to you. You don't have to answer them all. You don't have to send, I'll send it over, Kaylin. You don't have to send your responses to me. Of course, if there's something that you would like to share, please go ahead and do so. It will be confidential, but it's more of an inquiry process for you to see if some of these subjects make sense. And tomorrow I will wrap it up with what I forgot to, or didn't have time to go over, and with how Buddhism can help us with these structures. So thank you all for your attention. I'm sorry that I went over time, but I hope you have a beautiful, restful night. Pay attention to your dreams and pay attention to what emerges into your heart. Namaste.
Namaste, Prem. Thank you so much.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow at 7.